I'll give you a little history of the Greek text and the Hebrew text underlying the King James Bible. The New Testament was originally written in Greek, and the Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew. Okay? Now, we have 5,000 approximately manuscripts that attest to the words in the Greek New Testament. Of those 5,000, 99 and 4,400% agree with the King James readings. They have all of these, the Trinity, they have the deity of Jesus Christ, they have how you're saved, they have all of these things in those 5,000 manuscripts. There are less than a handful, less than what you could count on your hands, that agree with the new versions. And so this kind of Greek text type that underlies the new versions has really never been used by the church before. The church throughout history, from the time the Bible was written in Antioch, it moved up into the Italic Bible in northern Italy. Then a Waldensian pastor took that Italic Bible. His name was Olivetan, and he translated that into French, and so we have the French Olivetan Bible. He was a relative of John Calvin, so they took that French Olivetan Bible and translated the Calvin Bible. And the German Luther Bible, or actually it was the Teppel Bible at that time, was taken from this old Latin type, which was taken from the Greek from Antioch in Syria. And the Greek Orthodox Church only uses this Greek type of text underlying the King James. It's called the Textus Receptus. It's sometimes called the majority text. It's sometimes called the Byzantine text. It's got a lot of different Greek text names. But essentially, all of the Bibles around the world, for the most part, that are used by Christians have this Greek text underlying them. Okay. And so the false Greek text was created in Alexandria, Egypt. After the time of Christ, there was a school there. And there were some pagans, Philo, Saccas, Clement, Origen. Okay, what they tried to do was merge Christianity with paganism. And in the process of doing that, what they did was what we see, what I was talking about in the last hour, where you say God who created all things, but you have to take by Jesus Christ out because that wouldn't merge with paganism. Okay, and so they started dropping these 64,000 words. Actually, in the Greek text, it's only 8,000 words that they changed. But Origen changed the Bible to kind of merge the two together. Now, Origen's Greek text moved up to Caesarea. When Origen was found a heretic by a church council where he was living, they kicked him out. He moved up to Caesarea, and his Bible, his hexapla, Origen's Greek hexapla, was taken by the Roman Church at that time. Constantine was the emperor. Eusebius was his false prophet. There's always a false prophet there. And Eusebius took that, and by the hand of Pamphilus, which was the scribe, copied Origen's Bible. So, and it even says by the hand of Pamphilus at the end of this Vaticanus and Sinaiticus manuscripts. So when you see the footnotes in the new versions where it says the best Greek text, and that's what your caller was asking about, what Greek text it came from. When it says the best Greek text, that's a very subjective opinion of a few scholars, because the best is always, in their opinion, this Vaticanus and Sinaiticus manuscripts, which came from Origen, who was a kind of semi-Arian, Gnostic Platonist, you know. So he'd very much fit in a New Age or into a unity-type church, you know. And so they took that text type, but that text type sat, Purdue, no one using it from around 300 to about 1881. No one ever used this Greek text type because Christians could look at it and they could see this wasn't the Bible. But, you know, the Bible says in the last days there'll be a falling away. Take heed that no man deceive you. There'll be a falling away first. They've got to pull out the foundation. Before you can have someone fall, you've got to pull the rug out from underneath them. The only way you can do that is at the foundation, and the Bible is our foundation. So they've pulled it away, and in 1881, two gentlemen, following the higher criticism that was happening in Germany. In the German schools, there were some Arians. Those are people that don't believe in the deity of Jesus Christ. There were Unitarians, people who don't believe also in the deity of Jesus Christ. They were teaching at the theological schools in Germany then. In England, two priests in the Anglican Church at that time, whose names were Westcott and Hort, took some of their notions about higher criticism, about how we should change the Bible and whatever, took this Vaticanus Greek manuscript, this Sinaiticus Greek manuscript, and changed that historic Greek text. Now, Kenyon, who's the director of the British Museum, he said that until 1881, this text, this majority Greek text, held the view. Everyone used that until 1881, when these two gentlemen took it and they changed the Bible, the Greek Bible, to match this corrupted edition. So the church had never ever used that for almost 2,000 years. But as it turns out, when we read the life and letters of B.F. Westcott, the life and letters of Fenton John Anthony Hort, which were two bishops, brilliant men, brilliant scholars, they were Neoplatonists. Okay, they agreed with Origen's Neoplatonism. In fact, as a matter of fact, if you go to, anyone can go to their city library, because you have lots of libraries around here because of all the universities. Look in the Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics. Look under Alexandrian Theology. You will find them there, Westcott and Hort, under mysticism, Alexandrian mysticism. And the other person that you will find there is Philo. Now, if you go to the library, you find Philo starting the school. The offshoot in the liberal Christian world is Westcott and Hort in this Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics. If you go and look at the Encyclopedia of Myth and Magic, they will start with Philo, and then they will go off into Madame Blavatsky and the New Age movement. And so this same root in Alexandria has sort of blossomed out. And what happened with the Greek text in 1881 is these two gentlemen made 8,000 changes. Now, they had a few people, Tregelles and Alfred and some of these people working before them, but essentially they made the change. And when they did, there was an outcry. Dean Bergen, a lot of the scholars said, this is a new Greek text. They called it the new Greek text. And so when you read all the books back in that period, they said, why are we getting this new Greek text? But it worked its way into Princeton University in the United States. Several men, Macon and Warfield, went over and studied at the German school. And they brought back not the higher criticism, but the lower criticism, the textual criticism. They brought it back into Princeton. And then we had men like A.T. Robertson, who are, a lot of these men are, I believe, are truly Christian men. But they went under the tree of wisdom with the serpent hanging there. And they listened to, yea, hath God said. And they started making changes one by one by one. And this corrupt Greek text moved into the seminaries. And then we had the Revised Standard Version, and then we had the American Standard Version. You know, it's interesting. The American Standard Version was started by Philip Schaff, or created, we'll say, by Philip Schaff and his committee. Philip Schaff is another gentleman who lost his voice completely, okay? But Philip Schaff started something that we just all saw happen in Chicago not too long ago, the Parliament of World Religions. He started that with a group of liberals back in about 1900, where all the Hindus and all the people are meeting together. And he started the American Standard Version, and then the New American Standard Version is really just sort of an update from the American Standard Version. An interesting thing happened. If I can read a quote from the gentleman who was very much a part of the foundation of the New American Standard Bible. His name was Franklin Logsdon, and he must have truly loved the Lord, and he must have had a good heart for the Lord. He and Dewey Lockman started the New American Standard Bible. And then Franklin Logsdon read a book called Which Bible? And then he read another book called True or False. And they say very much the same thing that my book says, okay? But after he read that book, this gentleman who was at the very foundation of the New American Standard, as a matter of fact, if you buy a New American Standard today at the bookstore, the preface was written by Franklin Logsdon. But this is what he said, if I can read it for your listeners. He said, I must, under God, renounce every attachment to the New American Standard Version. I'm afraid I'm in trouble with the Lord. We laid the groundwork. I wrote the format. I helped interview some of the translators. I sat with the translators. I wrote the preface. I'm in trouble. I can't refute these arguments. It's wrong. It's terribly wrong, and what am I going to do about it? Then he said, I used to laugh with others. However, in attempting to answer, I began to sense that something was not right about the New American Standard Version. And then he went on to say, the finest leaders that we have today haven't gone into it, just as I hadn't gone into it. And so what we have now are two men who are on the New King James Committee who have come back around, back to the King James. One of them after he read my book and some other books, and one of them just on his own after he saw how the New King James came out. But we have men who have been on these committees who, after they've read my book, sort of realize this is wrong. They just didn't realize that they hadn't gone into the research about Westcott and Hort, and the fact that, as I was mentioning about Westcott and Hort, who created this new Greek text that underlies the new versions with so many things missing, they were spiritualists, which means they tried to make contact with the dead. They were very liberal churchmen at their time. As a matter of fact, Westcott was a representative for a brewery. So if you look at the Sunday paper, his picture would be there, and he would be advertising beer. And so this is the kind of man, you know, that's taking 8,000 words from the Greek text of the Bible. The other question that the person asked was about the Hebrew Old Testament. Okay, now the King James came from something called the Ben Hachim Rabbinic Bible. It was written around 1500. Now it wasn't written around 1500. This is the one that came from Isaiah, the prophets, and all the men of old. Okay, now something interesting happened in 1937. Rudolph Kittel changed the traditional Hebrew Bible. Okay, now, Rudolf Kittel is from Germany. Rudolf Kittel was anti-Semitic. His family did not like the Jewish people, so much so that his son, Gerhard Kittel, was tried and convicted of war crimes for the death of 5,000 of Europe's Jewry. And so this Rudolf Kittel was actually tried. He was Hitler's sort of high priest, propaganda high priest. He would write the propaganda, why we should kill the Jews. And then the people would read it, and they were getting brainwashed about this. But this was the son of Rudolf Kittel who changed the Old Testament. So now we have the New King James Version having the Biblica Hebraica Stuttgartensia underlying their Old Testament. Why would we want an Old Testament written by people who hate the Jews? You know, why wouldn't we want the traditional Hebrew Ben Hachim Rabbinic Bible, the new one that was created in 1937. This is 1937. This is just at the peak of anti-Semitism in Germany, just at the peak of when they were beginning to kill people, you know, kill the German people. Now, so like in the NIV, we have an Old Testament that's been changed in a number of places by this anti-Semitic person who is Rudolf Kittel. Then his son comes along, Gerhard Kittel, writes something called the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. Okay, now it's a 10-volume work that gives the etymology for all the Greek words in the New Testament. And so what happened there was his son, Gerhard, brought all of the pagan ideas into lexical information. So what you find today when you go to a bookstore and buy a lexicon is that we are not getting the historic Judeo-Christian meanings behind things. We are getting Rudolf Kittel's pagan notions about things. He added... Being brainwashed. Right. So people will look at a lexicon and they'll say, well, you know, the lexicon agrees with the new versions. Well, the reason it does is because they've gone to this ultra-liberal, half-pagan, half-Christian lexical information. And then when they look at it, they take out only the pagan information. Now, that's what they're doing with the monogenes, only begotten son. They used to look at the monogenes, and they used to look at the lexical information, and they would say, this means begotten. Now they're looking at monogenes, and they're saying, they're looking at the pagan things like the trimorphic protenoia and things like that, and saying, this means something different, one and only, or something very pagan.